So let's go ahead and move on now to Chapter 2. Chapter 2 of the book introduces us to some more background information here that we want to know about, and that's going to be stars and constellations. You go out at night, you look up, you see little pinpoints of light in the sky, obviously you see stars. And so you see the stars out here in the sky, and the ancient people would go out and they'd look up and they'd see stars. And one of the things they noticed, though, was that if you go out tonight and you look at stars, you go out tomorrow night, you see stars, you go out the next night, you see stars, you go out the next night, you see stars, you keep seeing the same stars, for the most part, in the same spots. Okay. Now, the entire sky shifts a tiny bit every day. We'll talk about that coming up later. But in general, you do see that there's a little bit of, there's a repetition. You see the stars pretty much in the same spot. So the sky shifts a little bit every day. Next month, you see the same things, and they're just shifted over in a different part of the sky. So things that were overhead, at like 10 o'clock tonight, 10 o'clock tonight in a month might be kind of lower to the western sky. Stuff that was kind of off in the eastern sky might be overhead at 10 o'clock in a month, even though it's low in the eastern sky night. So the sky shifts a little bit, and by the time that 12 months have gone by, you see the sky the same way it was before, the same stars and the same patterns. And so with a couple of exceptions, there's a couple of these little stars that seem to wander around, and they're in different constellations at different times. And so the Greeks called those planets. And that's what a planet looks like. It looks like a star that's wandering around. Planet actually means wandering star. And so so you see these group of stars, and if you look at what this picture right here is, you recognize that. A lot of people recognize that as Orion the Hunter. Now, Orion is actually a constellation that dates all the way back to the ancient Greeks. The Romans pretty much absorbed a lot of the Greek culture. They just renamed all the Greek stuff in Latin. But this is a Greek constellation right here. Much of our Western civilization, has come from Greek and Roman culture. Other cultures have looked up at the sky and they have seen the same stars, but they put it together differently. Instead of this being put together, we see this as a guy's shoulders up here, there's his head, there's his belt, there's his legs down here, so he's like kind of like that. He's got a belt with a sword hanging down right there. Okay, and so that's how we see all this, because that's how the Greeks saw it. But on the other hand, in Central America, the Mesoamericans saw that as like a cooking hearth, and a cooking hearth right here, the cook standing between with a loaf of bread baking right there. Okay, so different cultures looked up and saw that group of stars as something entirely different. Okay, and so everybody saw these things differently. And again, from the Greek perspective, they looked at this and they saw certain things. For example, we got Orion here, okay, and Orion's a hunter. And he hunts rabbits, and there's a little constellation down here, Lepus the rabbit. He's got a dog that he hunts with. There's the big dog, looks something like that, and the small dog looks something like that. Okay, so we got Canis Major and Canis Minor. Okay, but that's only part of the story here. Okay, so let me erase them, and let's talk a little bit about the rest of the Orion story. The rest of the Orion story is that one day there was this scorpion. In fact, there's a constellation that looks kind of like that. That's Scorpius the scorpion. And the scorpion had this poisonous sting, stung Orion. Orion was dying, and along comes Ophiuchus, which looks kind of like that. Ophiuchus is holding a snake. And so there's a constellation, Ophiuchus and Serpens the snake. Ophiuchus actually, according to legend, distilled the venom of the snake to cure Orion. Okay, don't actually try that from home. Really, it just kill you even faster. But in legend, this is how it worked, and so that cured Orion. And by the way, the symbol for a physician today is actually a staff with a snake wrapped around it, and it comes from that particular legend right there. Okay, and so these different constellations in the sky make up part of that story. In fact, it even goes one step further. Orion and the Scorpion are in opposite parts of the sky, and so in one setting, the other one's rising, and then when that one sets, Orion rises, and so what happens is the Scorpion and Orion chase each other around the sky for all eternity. So that's one story here. Another story is one of this king. Okay, the king by the name of PHYS, and he's got his wife here. Sorry, like that. That's his wife is Cassiopeia, the queen, and they've got this daughter. Okay, and the daughter here. She's in pretty deep trouble because she's chained up to a rock. Okay, and is about to be eaten by Cetus. Okay, Cetus is going to come eat her, but you don't have to worry because what's going to happen is that, and I've actually got the constellations in the wrong spot in the sky here. Along comes Perseus, the hero. Perseus is holding at arm's length the head of the Medusa. And so when the Cetus sees that, turns to stone, okay, and then together Andromeda and Perseus climb on the back of Pegasus, the winged horse. And Pegasus looks like a big square in the sky with like something hanging off of it. Okay, and so that's the story of Perseus. It's actually a really cool story. And so what happened was a bunch of years ago in Hollywood, they made a movie called Clash of the Titans based on this. Clash of the Titans had pretty cheesy stop-action motion special effects, but pretty decent acting. And then about 10 years ago, they remade Clash of the Titans with really cool CGI special effects and really cheesy acting. So anyway, but the original story was really cool. And so the Greeks used this story, and they used patterns in the sky to represent key parts of the story. In fact, remember in the ancient world, a lot of people could not read and write. And so what happened was that to help people remember the stories and mythology that were important to their culture, they'd pick patterns in the sky to represent it. Now, does that look like, does this up here look like a king? Does not look like a king to me. Does that look like a queen? No, it looks like a zigzag. Is that a woman chained to a rock? Not really, no. Is that a horse with wings? Pegasus, the winged horse? No, it's a square. Okay. And I imagine, like a couple thousand years ago, some guy's out, explaining the whole story to his kids and gets to the point of, Pegasus, winged horse, they fly off and live happily ever after. The kid goes, Daddy, that's not a horse, that's a square. And he goes, shut up, kid, that's a horse with wings. So if you don't see these things like they're supposed to be, that's okay, because no one's seen it really that way, all that well. I guess a scorpion vaguely looks like a scorpion, but anyway, the way you connect the dots is all unofficial. In fact, the pattern is unofficial. Because what happened was everybody saw it differently. Orion the hunter, different people actually would draw Orion differently in the sky, sometimes facing to the right, sometimes facing to the left, sometimes facing straight at us. People drew it differently all the time. And so the way they draw it or saw it was largely unofficial. Okay. Likewise, the way you connect the dots is unofficial. And so that was also an unofficial way of doing it. So different star charts connect the dots differently. And so that's all unofficial. What they finally did, though, was in the early part of the 20th century, the International Astronomical Union, which is the only body of professional astronomers that actually has the authority to do this, decided to change what is a constellation and define it by these boundaries and say if you're inside that boundary, you're in Orion. If you're outside the boundary, you're in a different constellation. Monoceros if you're off to the left, Gemini if you're up and to the left, Taurus if you're up and to the right, Lepus, the rabbit, if you're down underneath it, and then Eridanus if you're down and to the right. So all these constellations now have boundaries that are defined, and so that defines the constellation now. That was done in 1929 by the International Astronomical Union, and they published the list in 1930. 18 of the constellations that we recognize today go all the way back to the Mesopotamians. They were incorporated by the Greeks and then incorporated by the Romans. So there's 66 old Roman constellations in there. A couple of them have been actually modified a little bit. The IAU picked a total of 88 official constellations. So there are now 88 official constellations. On the useful handouts of the class, I've listed all 88 constellations and the official three-letter abbreviation for each one. So the entire sky is included. The Romans only had 66 constellations because they couldn't see the entire sky. The Earth got in the way. They couldn't see things that were only visible from the far southern hemisphere. Likewise, there were certain parts of the sky that just did not have any bright stars in them, so the Romans skipped over that. But the IAU decided to make 88 constellations incorporating the entire sky. So everything is now officially designated by those 88 constellations. Should also point out there's another word here for you to know, and that is an asterism. Okay, so an asterism is an unofficial grouping. So here's an example here. Can you find the asterism in there? Does anyone recognize those group of stars? Well, some of y'all might recognize that if you connect these stars here, you get something that looks like a Big Dipper. In fact, that's the Big Dipper. Okay, and so the Big Dipper is not really a constellation. The actual constellation is Ursa Major, the Big Bear. The Dipper is an asterism. It is a part of the back end here or the front end, depending on how you draw the bear. I've seen some of these bears facing to the right, and so that's the long, fluffy tail of the bear sticking out, except bears don't have long, fluffy tails. I've seen other people draw it facing left, so that's the nose of the bear. I don't really care how you draw the bear. How you draw it's unofficial anyway, and that Big Dipper is unofficial. But a lot of people learn those 7 stars as a pattern in the sky. It's unofficial. It's an asterism. That's what an unofficial group is. But a lot of people know it, so it's not incorrect to learn an asterism because a lot of people, if you say Big Dipper, people know what you're talking about. Now, it's Big Dipper in North America. In parts of Europe, that's a plow, not a dipper. A plow, like a horse-drawn plow for plowing a field. So that's the yoke of the plow. There's the blade of the plow right there. And so that's how they do it. And then other parts of Europe, it's a wagon. Another asterism you can see if you go out tonight and look up in the sky is something called the summer triangle, because it starts rising in the sky in the summertime, and by the time you get to the fall, it's like high in the sky near sunset. And that's the star Deneb, the star Vega, and the star Altair. Deneb is in the constellation Cygnus, Vega is in Lyra, Altair is in Aquila, and they make up this big triangle of stars that we call the summer triangle. In fact, Cygnus has another asterism in it. The Cygnus is a swan, and there's a couple other stars here that make kind of a swan here, but part of Cygnus the swan is called the Northern Cross because it looks like a big cross.